Hey, everybody.
Hi.
I hope you're doing well today. Let me start with my spiel. Okay, so my name is Rebecca Giannini. I'm a parenting and relationship coach, and this is my group. If you have found this group, I'm so excited that you're here. And if you want to improve your relationships and have the best family dynamic of your life, this is the place for you. We also talk a lot about healing generational trauma and so many other things that have to do with having the best relationships of our lives. So again, my name is Rebecca. I go live here every single week. Normally I go live at 5:30 Pacific Standard Time, but today I have something that I need to go to, so I'm going live a little bit early today. But mark your calendars, please, for 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And the thing that's great about attending live is that you can ask me questions in real time and I will answer them. If not, you could, and you're watching this on the replay, please put your questions in the chat and I will get back to them when I have a chance. And sometimes somebody will put in a question that will lead to the topic of our next live, or we can add that to our live list. So anyway, today, we're talking about obedience versus cooperation. And oftentimes, there are a couple of different reasons why a family or a parent is looking for obedience in their child. And usually there are some framework ideas around what it means to be a child and what it means to be a parent that are kind of getting in the way of the parent and child having a good relationship. So when we have this idea about obedience, usually there are beliefs that uphold the idea that obedience is appropriate. So those beliefs are often based on power dynamics that we're seeing in the parent's childhood home growing up. Or in a lot of times that comes also from religious situations too, the idea that children are meant to obey their parents and should obey no matter what. So if either one of those applies to you, there are other reasons too, but those are the pretty common reasons for why obedience is expected from kids. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but if either of those applies to you, put that in the chat. I'd love to hear. Okay, so obedience. So let's talk about obedience when it comes to the idea of respect and disrespect. When we expect immediate obedience from our kids, oftentimes it means that we had to offer immediate obedience to our parents. And we would have gotten in a lot of trouble if we didn't offer that. So when we are then switched into the position of power instead of being in the position of powerless, then we expect that that's just part of the deal of being a parent. And when you realize that's not just part of the deal, that comes with a price, it can be really triggering. And so parents might realize, hey, I don't want to be hitting my kids. I don't want to be spanking my kids. I don't want to be yelling at my kids, but they are not listening to me. They're not obeying me. And so oftentimes parents swing back and forth between trying to get obedience and then be respectful toward their kids, and get obedience and be respectful toward their kids. And so we want to come to this middle area where we give and receive respect from our kids. And we work together in cooperation, making sure that everybody in the family has access to the 4 principles of healthy relationships. So that would be, if you're new here, I'll just briefly cover those, but I have another video on the 4 principles. So if you want this topic in more depth, put that in the comments and we'll get that video too. So the first one, and I have hand signals to go with it, so when you're teaching your kids, you can help them remember more easily. Everybody deserves to be listened to when they're struggling. Everybody deserves to be spoken to with respect, even when the speaker's upset. Everybody deserves their body safety, and everybody deserves their boundaries to be respected. So obedience doesn't really jive with any of those 4 principles, because oftentimes what we need in order to get obedience is use of force. And yes, Christine, I'm sure we'll look at these comments here in the Zoom chat and make sure that you guys get those videos. One of the challenges is if you're on Zoom and you have a different name on Facebook, then we won't know who to give that to. So maybe when you're requesting the video here on the Zoom, make sure to put your name in the chat, who you want Christina to send those resources to, your Facebook name. So yeah, so those are the 4 principles. And oftentimes the things that our parents used with us in order to get immediate obedience violated one of those principles in a very significant way. So it's very difficult to get people to immediately obey unless fear is involved. And fear it's really difficult to maintain an open and healthy relationship when fear and power dynamics are at play. So if everything is a power struggle between you and your child, you're going to have to be bigger and scarier and stronger, and you're going to have to exert more and more power over them the older they get in order to maintain that power imbalance. And so that is why obedience, that's one of the reasons why expecting immediate obedience isn't really in line with parenting in a healthy way. When somebody immediately obeys, there, like I said, usually there is a sense of fear involved. There's a sense of fight or flight. And immediate obedience is actually a sign of one of the trauma responses to fawn. So that we have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so immediate obedience would fall under fawn response. And so it means that there's a threat detected in our body, and we're trying to eliminate the threat by fawning over that person. So when we are big enough and scary enough and have put enough fear in our kids, yes, we will get immediate obedience, but that is not a good thing. It's not a sign that the relationship is a healthy one. It's not a sign that our kids respect us. It's a sign that we have made ourselves such a significant threat to them that they're choosing, that their body is helping keep them safe by choosing to fawn. If you want our video on the different trauma responses, let us know about that too, and we'll get you those resources. So we are not after, if we want to have healthy relationships, we're not after immediate obedience. And it's going to take a little while to probably, if you were raised in the idea that obedience is what respect looks like, it's going to take a while for you to kind of adjust the paradigm that obedience is really a positive thing in the first place, because so many of us were raised with this idea of obedience being something that shows honor and that shows respect and is what parents are deserving of. And so it's a shift in a paradigm to start understanding that obedience is almost never a sign of a healthy relationship. I would argue never a sign of a healthy relationship. We're not after obedience. We're after mutual respect and cooperation. If in our relationships we care deeply about how we affect the other person, we are going to be making space for their boundaries. We're going to make space for their requests. We're going to be honoring their feelings. We're going to be looking at how our behavior affects them. And so when you look at your kids as they are growing up and in their adult relationships, what you would want from them, would you want for somebody, would you want in their relationships to be making choices out of fear of losing that person or fear of consequences, and or would you want them to be making choices because it deeply matters to them how they're affecting other people? I think it's a fairly obvious question, and most people, when they hear it framed that way, they think, of course, they want their children to be living out of their values, and they want their children to be uh, honoring others in the relationships. And of course, we all want that. But the problem is we have this idea, we have this association that obedience is the way through which we do that. And it's just not the case. So if we want to have children who are cooperative and honor us and respect us, we need to be modeling that for them. And the way that we model that for them is by having healthy interactions with them, where we're not using power over them, where we're not using punishment and uses of force to just get what we want based on our relationship to them being older than them. Yes, as parents, we deserve respect, but not because we're parents, because we're people, and children are people. And that might sound like such a simple statement. Of course, children are people, but oftentimes the things that we expect from children are things that we wouldn't expect from an adult, a normal person. So, for example, if somebody grabbed your phone out of your hand and said, give that to me, and took the phone out of your hand, you'd be pretty upset, and it would be kind of strange for somebody to expect you to respond respectfully to that sort of a violation. But parents will do that to kids all the time, thinking, I'm the person who bought this toy, or media time is done, or whatever it is. And people will not offer the same respect to a child than they would to an adult. And then when the child rightly gets upset, the parent then often punishes them for that reaction. And so we oftentimes don't realize that we're asking something of them that we would never ask a partner. We would never ask an employee. We would never ask a boss. We would never ask anybody else. And we think that because they're smaller than us, subconsciously, we think that because they're smaller than us, or because they're related to us by our genetics, that they should just be able to respond to those slights in a respectful way, no matter what. And the fact is that kids are humans, and they have a full range of emotion, and we want to model for them respect so that they can return that and reciprocate that with us. If we are showing them disrespect and expecting them to respond to us respectfully, it's unfair, it doesn't make sense, and it's unkind. And so when we see behavior in our kids that we don't like or is disrespectful, we need to get in the habit of asking ourselves, how, not if I've modeled this for them, but how have I modeled this for them? If they're speaking to us in a tone that we don't like, they might be saying different words. So they might say, but mom, I don't want to, or whatever it is. But we need to look at how we're modeling that tone for them. It's going to be different because they're not in that position of power over us. So, but we might be saying it about, picking them up from soccer practice, or making them a snack, or whatever it is. We might be modeling it for them somewhere else. So we want to get in the habit of asking ourselves, when have I modeled this disrespect for them? How am I modeling this disrespect for them? In what ways do I sound like that when I'm talking to them? And most times parents, when they start asking themselves that question, can find that link. It takes some time at first to start seeing the patterns, but most of the time that's what's happening. And oftentimes it is the very same things that we did to our parents that our kids then do to us, because that's how generational those behavior patterns get passed down. So we want to look at, what are the things that we would get punished for if we were a kid. If I was a kid and I said the same thing that my child said, oh, I can't, like, my brain. Okay, so we want to put ourselves in our kids' position for a second and imagine that we are the child and our parent is there instead of it being our child with us. and imagine what the response would be from our parent. And oftentimes the response would have been a lot greater and a lot more serious if it was us and our parents. And so in that discrepancy, we start to see that's where our frustration builds, because we know that if that would have happened as a child, what would have happened to us? And so when we don't have access to correct that behavior in that same way, it feels like there's this great sense of injustice that happens. Like, oh, I never would have said that to my parents, or I never would have complained about such and such, or this and that. And so in that discrepancy, we often find a sense of injustice, and then that leads us to wanting to punish or wanting to correct the situation or put them in their place or that sort of thing. So there's often a lot of ego in this topic as well. When we're expecting someone to, when we're expecting somebody to immediately obey, usually our ego is at play. And so the other thing that I would recommend is that you go through the internal framework resources that we have. There are several videos I've done on the internal framework, and there's some worksheets also, but I would do some processing around parenting, what it means to be a good parent, what it means to be a good child, what a respectful child does, what a disrespectful child does, and just kind of start brain dumping in a journal or on some of the worksheets. And you'll start to kind of see what your belief systems are about how kids should behave, or how parents should behave, how kids should respond to their parents. Anytime you notice that word should, pay close attention, because that often has a very strong framework holding up that belief. But the problem is some of those beliefs are incredibly flawed, and the associations we have with those beliefs are also flawed. So if you have this idea that kids should obey their parents and kids should listen the first time without asking questions, for example, why do we believe that? We want to ask that question. Who else do I ask that of besides my children? Who else would I ask that immediate obedience of without asking any questions? Who else would I bark an order at, expect them to respond respectfully to it without asking any questions or giving a look? We really don't expect that of anybody else, nor should we. Everybody deserves to be spoken to with respect when the speaker's upset. Everybody deserves their body safety. Everybody deserves their boundaries to be respected, and everybody deserves to be listened to when they're struggling, even if their struggle is as a result of a boundary that you need to have in place. So when our boundaries are causing our kids distress, and they should, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have boundaries, but it does mean that we should take care of them in their struggle. So I think I forgot to finish my sentence there, but our kids deserve for us to show up for them when they're struggling, even when they're struggling as a result of our boundary. So if you're watching this on the replay, please make sure that you put any questions you have in the chat. And I quickly check to see on Facebook. Rachel and Hannah, please reach out to Christina about the videos that you like, that you're interested in. Reach out to her on Facebook so she knows which profile to send those to, because we have lots of people in the group. And let me check real quick on Facebook to see if there are any questions. Yeah. Yes, the replay will be available, Carolina. Yeah, good. I'm so glad. So this also, when we, like I was saying at the beginning of the live, this also probably has to do with the types of relationships that you had with your parents as a child, or your caregivers as a child, and the belief systems they had about kids. And oftentimes the belief systems from several years ago were less supportive and less open about kids being humans, and less supportive about kids being able to have emotional responses to normal situations. So we're dealing with, generations of ideas, of problematic ideas about what children deserve and how children should behave. And I'm a huge fan of cooperation. I'm a huge fan of respect. I think it's incredibly important, but the way that we achieve that should be also through respect. And the way that we achieve cooperation should be through respect. Our kids deserve that to be given to them and to be modeled for them before we ask for it from them. So I think I might end up doing a part 2 to this because there's just so much to talk about here, and I'm at time. So be gentle with yourself as always. This is difficult work, but it's so worth it. And I will see you next week at 5:30 Pacific Standard Time. All right, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.